Over the last few years, the State Inspector General's office has focused largely on the work of prisons across the state. A few months ago, the office released a comprehensive report outlining the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision's inability to completely comply with the HALT Act because of outdated record-keeping practices. To learn more about that program and the work of the office, we sat down with the Inspector General, Lucy Lane. Thank you so much for joining us today, Inspector General.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, your office is tasked with keeping government in check and investigating things like corruption, fraud, and conflicts of interest. And I know that's a pretty tall order, but I wanted to understand, in the past 3 years that you've been leading the office, what has surprised you most about that work?
Well, Chantel, the recent Siena poll reflected that 2/3 of Americans believe that democracy is under threat. So it has never been more important that agencies like ours, who are tasked with being the watchdogs for government, are doing our jobs effectively and efficiently and in a nonpartisan way. Mm-hmm. So amongst the things I have been surprised by, although perhaps I shouldn't, is the incredible work that so many New York State employees are doing on the ground in the many executive agencies across the state. And I have seen it from the parks way up in the North Country out to the tip of Long Island. We have seen it in so many of the agencies under our jurisdiction that the vast majority of folks who work for New York State are putting taxpayer dollars to good work on behalf of New Yorkers.
And a few months ago, your office released a report which, unpacked how the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision needed to modernize their record-keeping capabilities to comply with the HALT Act. And we know the HALT Act is aimed at limiting the use of solitary confinement in state prisons. So I wanted to understand, what is the correlation between record-keeping and limiting the use of solitary confinement?
Modernizing technology should be top of mind for folks in government at every level. That's true for us at the Inspector General's office as well. And we have really invested in making sure that we are developing a tech-forward approach to oversight. In terms of the analysis we did of the New York State law that went into effect just over 2 years ago that significantly restricts the use of solitary confinement in New York's prisons, where we were doing an assessment of whether or not the Department of Corrections was complying with those limitations. And what we found was that in many ways they were working towards compliance, but that unfortunately it was very difficult to assess the full measure of their compliance because so much of the Department of Corrections record keeping is still done with pen and paper. Mm-hmm. And so I have been in every prison in New York State. I have signed in pen and ink into these logbooks. And unfortunately, that means that when we are trying to assess whether or not the agency is complying, we are looking at pen and ink logbooks. And that can be very difficult across 44 facilities. So amongst our recommendations were a real investment in 21st century technology for tracking the movement of incarcerated folks, and that will better enable oversight.
And what were you hearing from officials with the department about why it's been taking them, so long to modernize their process? It seems intuitive to have it, be modern and not solely based on pen and paper.
I can say from my own perspective in overseeing an agency that a transition to digital practice is a challenging one, and it's something that many state agencies are working towards. But of course, there is a tremendous amount of infrastructure and resource investment that's required to get that done.
And what were some of the responses that you got on that report from New Yorkers?
Chantel, I spent many years teaching college in New York State's prisons and have worked alongside many directly impacted New Yorkers over the years. But something that really struck me after we issued our report was that a formerly incarcerated student of mine reviewed the report, and he had spent time in solitary confinement in New York State's prisons. And he said to me, I finally feel seen, that someone is taking seriously this traumatic experience that I had. So part of what we do is not just to make sure that government is operating effectively, but is to work to give voice to New Yorkers who might otherwise be unseen. So I encourage any New Yorker who has concerns about fraud or corruption in New York State government to reach out to us at 1-800-DO-RIGHT and to follow our work on social media at New York State IG, which is has been a very useful way of us reaching a broader swath of the public. I'm really pleased that we get complaints in from kind of across the spectrum. So in terms of our analysis of the Solitary Confinement Act, or HALT, for example, we received tips and concerns that came in both from the incarcerated population and families of the incarcerated population in New York, and from staff at the Department of Corrections. And that is what we really seek to do, is to provide an opportunity for all New Yorkers to bring us their concerns so that we can determine when government is working for New Yorkers.
And apart from that issue, the last time you were on the show, you unpacked the issue of workers' compensation fraud in New York State prisons. So can you tell us more about where that issue stands today and any progress that's potentially been made on that front?
What we identified when I was last on the show was that there was a provision of the Department of Corrections contract that resulted in really extreme numbers of corrections officers being out on workers' compensation leave that was coming at a cost to incarcerated New Yorkers' safety and to programming, as well as to the safety of corrections officers. And that problem, unfortunately, seems to continue to persist. That said, we are doing great work on workers' compensation oversight. We had a recent case out of Saratoga County that was really a devastating set of facts in which a contractor did not have workers' compensation coverage, and a roofer unfortunately fell to his death. And the contractor actually moved the body to cover up the fact that it had been a workplace-related injury and that he didn't have workers' compensation. We're really pleased that that resulted in a guilty plea to a felony, and that is just one example of the extraordinary work that our workers' compensation staff do every day, making sure that people who should have workers' compensation insurance to take care of their workers are being held responsible to that commitment.
And as you mentioned earlier, your office has been pushing transparency and the use of the open data interface to just track the complaints that you're getting from New Yorkers. So can you tell us more about the interface and how it has informed the work that you're doing daily?
Absolutely. We hired the first ever Chief Technology Officer at the offices of the Inspector General, and I'm really pleased that we have a robust technology unit who are amongst the sort of backbones of our office. We are putting out monthly a dashboard that indicates where our complaints are coming from and what is happening with them, so that the public can hold us accountable for doing the work of following up on all the complaints we receive.
And in the years to come, how are you hoping to offer more transparency to New Yorkers?
We're going to continue with our commitment to putting out letters that we send to agencies with recommendations for change. We're going to continue to push out our reporting on large-scale and systemic problems. We're going to continue to monthly publish our data, but perhaps all the more so, we are really leaning in to having conversations with media and having conversations through social media to reach a broader swath of New Yorkers, and to getting out in the community. I'm very proud that we have built out a training unit. For the first time at the office, we have a very seasoned lawyer who is dedicated full-time to training New York State employees on the ground. And she and other members of our staff have been at the racetracks, at the parks, at the prisons, at many of the agencies we oversee, talking to folks who do the work every day of, say, keeping New York State clean for New Yorkers, keeping New York State children through the Office of Children and Family Services, keeping those young people safe and making sure their needs are met. And we are making sure that those staffers have the tools they need to report when they see anything that's concerning to them. So our really investing in training is making a tremendous difference in educating New York State employees and New Yorkers more generally about the fact that we are here to be the watchdogs of New York State government.
And lastly, as I mentioned at the top of the interview, you've been leading the State Department for 3 years. So what do the years to come look like? Are there any other issues that you haven't been able to focus on that you're hoping to look into more broadly?
We do what we can to let the data direct us. And for example, we really invested early on in our oversight of the Department of Corrections because more than half of our complaints annually were coming in related to that department. So we're going to continue to track where the complaints are coming in and to invest resources where we see them.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we were speaking with the New York State Inspector General, Lucy Lane. And for more information, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org.